done, there's a lot, and he's got, when Katrina happened, he was
You have
21.
life experience.
He was the assistant director of Jacobs Camp. And so he was helping to run that whole project. So like he really bright guy. There's a third generation Mississippian, a second generation Jacksonian. He went to Harvard. Get out, this is his home. Yeah, so like he knows everybody. He knows everybody. He's doing what he does, or he's. Yes.
I got it.
Yeah.
I understand exactly. I understand.
So
exactly.
like, everything is awful. And they're fine, because they've got everything, thank God. They didn't lose, nobody hurt, they didn't lose anything.
Anything like you are.
They're gonna be. Yeah. We're still down, yeah. So like they're gonna be able to go in for about a year. It also houses the offices, the organization used to work for, which used to have its own office, now they're housing, so like they also need to figure out, but like. These are massive inconveniences.
Yeah, well, I need.
Just this incredibly small. Just having this incredible amount of damage. When it was the Klan, it felt different. It felt more like, it felt like we were in a fight in July. This is a kid. This is a kid who can make a mosquito bite to a life-threatening.
Just.
Well, they're. The only thing he said was to me about the administration was, I'm hoping and praying that they. The hate crime piece to the prosecution. He thinks about. That's the only thing really is about. Yeah.
They didn't in Boulder.
Right.
They do it every day.
Right. So anyway, we gotta start afternoon. I can't come back from it.
Really, I got great professors. And I got a great, I boss who's so good insurance, which is really.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm late for this, to begin our conversation. That's your fault, not mine. And I do need to just preface the conversation that I have another conversation at 1 p.m. today. So I am going to be skedoodling out of here as soon as we finish. So if you have other things to discuss, I want to talk about them with you, but just not this afternoon after our conversation. But I want to bring us back into where we ended last week, which is that we had laid out the 5 teachings from our tradition, that as our congregation sat down to imagine what might our social justice work look like, we used to undergird our work, right? The idea of all of Israel being responsible one for another, the idea of not standing idly by, the idea of loving the stranger, the idea of being concerned about the generations that come after, and the idea of pursuing justice. Those were the 5 values that our tradition teaches, that were already written on the walls of our buildings before we even undertook this undertaking. Right? And so when we said, how do we start to think about what might this work look like, we looked to those words for guidance. And when we were about to end the conversation last week, but it's really important to me that you understand this piece. And I make no bones about the fact that part of the reason why I wanted to have this 3-part conversation is there are pieces to this work that are still not understood by a wider piece of our congregation. And what I'm about to share with you may be the least well understood and perhaps the most important piece of what we are doing. And so if I can deputize the 20-ish or so of you who are here today and on Zoom and who may be watching later to help carry this message out to folks you're working with, that would be wonderful. The thing that I hear from people, and I've heard from people over the last 18 to 36 months, is what happened to my good old social action? I love the fact that Temple Bethel was committed to social action, and what happened to it? It's a fair question. We spent a lot of time thinking about what our language was going to be. And I want to walk you through the evolution and expansion of the language that because we were deliberate in how we undertook it to try to, so that we had an answer to that question. When you think of the social action of old, and some of you have sat on social action committees in generations past, or in, I would say like 5-year periods past, what did social action at Temple Beth El look like until 2024? Give me some examples.
I went to. It was, Eleanor got me because she said, Dory, I think this will be a great committee for you. And my son was about 10 years old. I had my parents babysitting. I sat for 4 hours and it was a mishmash. And at the end of that, I never went back again because I was paying, after my parents were like, you came back at 11 o'clock, you're supposed to pick them up at 9:30. I was like, okay.
Was I in that meeting?
That was, no, you
Okay,
were not even a
good.
rabbi now. Okay, we still had the young lady who, my son Pam, we had Rabbi Pam.
Okay,
But that, she was not in charge, Rabbi Laura, anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay, Jessica was in charge. But it was like a whole mishmash. Okay, we want to give money here, we want to give money here, we want to give money here, we want to march here. That was my first and last meeting. I never went again. So I guess my question to you eventually will be, if you can tell it, what kind of time are we talking about to be on one of these what kind of a commitment?
I'm not talking about committees for 1 second in this conversation. What was the social action work that the congregation did? I think Alan has a good answer to this question.
Give a little money.
We gave money, right? We gave money. What else did we give?
We had mitzvah days.
We had mitzvah days, right? So we gave money, we gave clothes, we did projects, right? What we did was,
There was no continuity.
there was no, so before I give the critique, I'm gonna give this is what we did. We met people's needs that were right in front of us, right? When we saw that there was someone who needed food or money or clothing or whatever kind of resource that we could say, oh, you need this, we can get it for you. We did that. And that's good, right? It's part of our, it's very much in our tradition. It's very much, you clothe the naked, you feed the hungry. It comes from Torah. Most houses of worship engage in work like that. And it's critically important
But
to the recipient who is getting it. And it's not necessarily strategically thought about. It's not necessarily, with any sense of continuity. And that's the beginnings of the critique. And I can celebrate some places where we actually did turn it into having a vision, right? And the giving tree is a good example of that, right? The giving tree of seeing the perspective of starting with the couple of households in Dixie Manor who needed Christmas gifts for their family 30 some odd years ago. And even to today, where the giving tree is, the amount of goods that are being collected and distributed, either, if we were to dollarize it, it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars every year of things that are being given out. But here's the thing, they're still pretty narrowly focused on holiday gifts, clothing, back to school, and then the quiet giving is those somewhat random, like, here's a family, they have articulated needs, and we have resources to make that happen. And that's the focus. And we march, we go on walks for this illness or that cause. And we do the swabbings and we do the things. And that was where, George, I love the Jewish framing of what you described it. What is the Yiddish word you used to describe that work? Mishmash. Right? Mishmash. It's a good word. And it's a good descriptor. And listen, like, it's noble to want to do everything for everyone when it comes in front of you. It's just not particularly sustainable without an overwhelming amount of energy. It's not particularly efficient. And here's the piece that really prompted the bigger piece of the conversation. We could spend every dime and every hour that we have trying to feed people who are hungry today. And the moment we're done, they're still hungry.
Yeah.
The moment that we're done, we're still hungry. And so that is, and that is a reality. Sherry Shiner put in the chat that one thing that happened was that some of the things that when Susie Broad, who was the leader of the Giving Tree, noticed that there were additional needs that could be met, she actually spun it off into its own organization because that kind of went outside the scope of what the Giving Tree had focused on. It had need a whole other set of resources and focuses. And Sweet Dream Makers is the very, very successful outcome of that.
What's the?
Sweet Dream Makers is an organization that has a very, very direct and simple, not simple, very direct mission. Put children in beds with bedding. That's all she does. She finds out which kids need beds. She learned about the need of sleeping arrangements from her work with the Giving Tree, and she said, that is a thing that I can do.
7,000 beds last.
7,000 beds last year at $250 a pop, give or take, right?
Whoa.
Taking advantage of individual donors, taking advantage of grant money available from all kinds of things. It needed to be outside the auspices of the synagogue, and she has gone and run with that.
Yeah.
Okay?
Great job.
And the moment that she will never run out of kids to give beds to, and she can meet every single need that she knows about, and the moment if she ever were to close the doors the next day, the need's gonna be there. Okay? So that is social action. In the framing of sort of philanthropy and service, that is often described as direct service. Giving to people, doing for people in the moment that they had. Jenna, you had a comment before that I pushed aside for a second.
No, that's right. I was just gonna say, but I think it's really important also to focus on, but you were getting to that, on not just on reactive, but on proactive.
I'm glad you feel the way I was learning the thought history of the congregation, but we're in alignment on where we're going with this, which is great. So this is what kind of came out of those surveys that we had done, which is that people said we want to do more, and that more is, if you imagine for a moment, I'll tell a quick story. You often hear this in organizing circles of a community that lives on a river, and downstream, all of a sudden starts flowing dead bodies. And they start taking the bodies out of the water and they start burying the bodies. And first it was 1, and then it was 3, and then it was 10, and they kept coming and they kept burying, they kept burying, they kept burying. And that's direct service. And someone finally says, wait a minute, maybe we should go upstream and see what's going on as to why people are dying, that we can do something about it. And that is where we took this expansion of our work to what can we do out in the society, out in the community, that might change public policy, that might alleviate the needs that are there, that might change what's going on in our community, that would involve things like advocacy to elected officials, that might involve things like working in collaboration and partnership with other organizations that think beyond just the giving to folks what they need in the moment. And so those two pieces together, what we call social action, that direct service piece, that historical piece, and what we framed as civic engagement, engaging out in the community around us on the advocacy side, right? Listen, we're doing this right now. I did it yesterday. One of the things I know a lot of folks in the Jewish community are wondering is, where are the voices coming from around the community standing up against this new scourge of anti-Semitism? So what did I do yesterday? I called the head of the Interfaith Clergy Association and say, the Jewish community needs to hear from you. Right? We need to hear from the interfaith clergy that what happened in Mississippi is being paid attention to. That's an act of civic engagement. We are blessed to live locally in a place where those concerns are being heard from. Right? And we are blessed to know that the city of Jackson, Mississippi is also hearing from and responding to the needs of Beth Israel congregation and the Jews there. But that doesn't happen overnight. That takes relationship building along the way so that the president of the synagogue can call the mayor, can call the chief of police, can call the US attorney, and that phone call will be answered. Spencer.
I was really upset when the fire chief took more than a few seconds of hesitation to say Jewish anti-discrimination, anti-Semitism, or
It's not
whatever,
the fire chief's job.
still,
It's not the fire chief's
I
job.
shouldn't have hesitated.
It's not the fire chief's job. I'm not gonna, we also live, and I'll say, we also live in a 5-second response time. Right? By Saturday evening, the Jewish professional community was already up in arms that this wasn't national news yet.
Yes.
Right? Like, the fire chief had been up all night putting fire out.
Fair enough.
Right? And it's not his job to determine why the person did what they did. It's his job to determine what happened. And if they know who did it. And to tell the authorities this seemed intentional. Someone else investigates the perpetrator. And to why. And by the way, that's an important piece of civic engagement. I will share with you that one of the things that is sometimes frustrating to me professionally is when people come to me and they say, the Jewish community has a concern, how come this specific elected official hasn't done anything about it? Well, it's not the members of Congress's job to talk about curriculum in the high schools. Of the curriculum in the high schools, right? There are all kinds of levels of responsibility, from local electeds at city council, county commission, to sheriffs and police department, to school boards, to state legislators and state senates and governors. Like, there's all these different roles, and they actually don't all do the same thing.
So vote on March 12th.
Always votes, right? As you see, which is why we put protecting democracy as one of our values. But knowing this navigation, right? Knowing who's what to talk about, right? As much as he might want to tell you, foreign policy, not the purview of the governor, not the purview of the legislature, not the purview of the county commission, not the purview of the city council. Development, business development, maybe a little bit, but foreign policy, no. And being knowledgeable about that and knowing who to ask for what is part of that, building the efficiencies. So I want to read this statement that frames for us how we think about this. The 5 values that we discussed last week. The strength of bonds of understanding, concern for the vulnerable, pursuit of justice, not remaining indifferent, and a vision for next generations will guide our social justice work as we seek to leave the world better than how we found it. I could not think of a more deeply Jewish idea than leaving the world better than how we found it. We will pursue these values through 2 important and interconnected efforts: social action and civic engagement. Social action is helping meet people's needs today and can include direct service projects such as fundraising, supplies collection, helping with immediate need in our community, or raising awareness around certain causes, right? They could be medical, they could be whatever. Civic engagement is advocating for a vision of our community inspired by our Reformed Jewish values through things like ballot initiatives, lobbying elected officials, and partnering and collaborating with other organizations to amplify our voice and our influence. What I saw personally in my work here that led me into this is that Temple Beth El has a strong diaphragm, large lungs with deep lung capacity. We have a loud voice in our city, in our region, in our county, in our state, and yes, even in our nation. We are the 7th largest Reformed synagogue in the country. We are the largest Reformed synagogue in the region and the largest synagogue in the state. And also then the county and the city. We have a voice, should we choose to use it,
Yes,
right? And figuring out how, so that the voice remains strong, that we don't strain our voice, and that we don't become children who cry wolf, and that our voice is used to amplify other things. That's the fun part and the challenging part. But I will also say that these 2 things are interconnected. So for example, when we do want to talk about economic insecurity, right? We know that a lot of our action work is done to address that, right? And that is the Giving Tree, but that's the hurricane relief drives and all those things. Some of our best resources for what kind of policy changes might be necessary are the same people that we are serving through our direct service, right? So for example, We have a relationship with the folks at Dixie Manor through multiple decades of our work with them. And when the conversation started bubbling up that there's going to be a redevelopment in Dixie Manor, we also saw, whoa, those folks who are supposed to be the beneficiaries of that redevelopment don't have a voice around the table. Well, they said they don't have a voice. And we said, okay, what can we do to help find a voice? So step number one was to get a seat on the Boca Raton Housing Authority for a resident of Dixie Manor, which there now is. And so now as they're thinking about what the redevelopment plan of Dixie Manor is, you actually have the voice of a resident who can speak on behalf of the residents around the table. Now, in a conversation like that, the current residents of Dixie Manor aren't the only voice that should be around the table. You need to have public policy people. You need to have public housing experts. You need to have other types of people around the table. And you want a housing authority and then a city council who does the little r Republican thing, meaning hearing from the constituents and using their elected authority to make a decision that's the best for the community. You need all those together, but you can't do it without the voice of the people who the work is going to most directly affect directly. And so that was a piece of it. If we were to think about health, right? So we know from, all the different swabbing folks we swabbed with, hey, maybe there may be a policy shift at the state or perhaps national level that we want to join in on a lobbying effort to say, we'd like to see more funding go to X, Y, or Z, because we think with just a little bit more, a lot can be done. Those opportunities are there. At the big picture, they work together, even if we're sort of working on the ground doing one or the other at a given time. Am I making this clear?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Are you now my acolytes and my deputies? When
Acolytes,
people-
maybe not, deputies, yes,
Okay,
Acolyte, right here.
yeah,
not there yet.
Well done.
Yeah.
right.
Well said.
As an organization, we're never gonna move away from social action. And we shouldn't, because it's core to our mission. It's core to our mission to help people, right? Because if you only spend time thinking about public policy, you will watch a generation of people starve to death while you wonder, how do we stop them from being hungry? You need to feed them while they're hungry, while we are also working to not make them be hungry. And guess what? As the 7th largest synagogue in the country and the largest in the state, we actually have the capacity to do both at the same time. It just takes a focus or multiple, and we can do that.
Contacts.
Well, that's the
Maybe a
work.
rabbi who knows what he's doing,
That's the work. So as I described to you last week,
standing right there.
we sat around with this committee, this task force, and we asked ourselves, knowing our tradition, what are the areas of public concern that we think that these 5 values speak to, that we think ought to be the concern of our congregation? And I will tell you that the list of potential ones was longer than these 13. There were about 7 or 8 more that were that were at least not, and we went around and we brainstormed, right? Throw out ideas of things you think might be on there. And we talked about them. And then we did a poll. And what's interesting was these 13 had super majority support. Certainly more than 2/3, and all of them were, I don't think it was a single one that had more than one person who didn't say, yes, that should be included. This was by the way, a big task.
When was this?
This was like done in a little over a year ago. This was a project that was taken during the 24-25 year. And so it was like around this time last year that we had got to this point in the conversation, having already done the work to think about the values, have already done the work to articulate the statement that I showed before, right? We sat down and we said, okay, what are we gonna do? And these, what's that?
Healthcare's not.
Healthcare itself was not on there. It was something that was discussed. And this is for right now. And what we needed was something to say that the board was gonna approve, to be able to say, if we wanna do something in this particular area, we already have pre-approval from the board. Now, I will say to you, Fern, that if we had had this conversation in 2009, healthcare may have been on this list. Because part of it has to do with the fact that we do have to be somewhat discriminating and we're gonna spend our energies. We are not working, by the way,
I was just curious because.
yeah. No, it's a fair, because it was one of the things that got on there.
There's gonna is what makes people economically unstable.
So that's what we saw, was that healthcare could be its own thing.
Yeah.
And there's not a whole lot in our tradition that speaks directly to healthcare. If you really think about it.
Well, to reproductive freedom, no.
I'm talking about healthcare in general. What we found was if we broke healthcare apart, a lot of the things that you'd be worrying about, like economic insecurity,
Yeah.
it could be done through there, right? We have reproductive freedom in there because that is something that is specifically touched on and is a piece of healthcare that came up. And so there was some negotiation among ourselves, which is to say, if there are things that we, like, some of us think should be on there, but there's not a consensus that it should be, is it because it doesn't fit perfectly as a standalone thing? And this is where we ended up.
Curious.
There's overlap is what I.
There's totally overlap, right? There's overlap between child protection and economic insecurity. There's overlap between reproductive freedom and economic insecurity. There's overlap between LGBTQ rights and anti-Semitism. There's overlap between separation of church and state and LGBTQ rights. There's a lot of overlap here. There's overlap between Zionism and anti-Semitism, right? And we're so
Freedom and women's rights. Yeah.
exactly. And so these are not lanes of work. These are areas of concern. Okay? Things that we think that we know that our tradition calls upon us to be responsive to. And I'm going to say always, comma, and especially when it's of acute concern in the community, right? So for example, listen, gun violence prevention is always a concern. It was more of a concern on February 15th, 2018, meaning there was more to be done on it. One of the things that was hindering us is that as something was really coming into focus in the larger public square, that we felt like we should have a voice in that conversation. There should be something for us to be doing. We didn't have the comfort to know what we could and couldn't do. So for example, when the shooting happened at Stoneman Douglas High School, and we wanted to be responsive, there was a little bit of needing to figure out what our elbow room was vis-a-vis our clearance from the Board of Trustees. When we were working, 18 months ago on Amendment 4, we actually brought that work to the board for its own approval. This project was in process, but in order us to do the work that we knew this plan would envision us doing, it was going to be happening before this process was brought to a culmination. So we went to the board specifically and said, do we have the board's approval to go full on? Does Temple Beth El stand in favor of Amendment 4? We wanted the board to go on the record on a vote on that question, and it was unanimous that it was. So it gave us the clearance to do everything that we did vis-a-vis Amendment 4. If it were to happen again, God willing, don't hold your breath. But if another amendment was going to be on the ballot come in November of 2026 or 2028 that would reestablish reproductive rights and reproductive freedom in Florida, the temple would not need to go to the board for us to do the work. The board has approved it already. Not because of the vote on Amendment 4, but because of the outcome of this project. Spencer and then Dory.
First off, it's very impressive you managed to organize this in a year. I couldn't have done it in 10. So, wow.
I've been thinking about it for 5 before that, so it helps.
Okay, that. Second, I'm really lost. I feel like, can you I don't know, it feels.
Give me 20 minutes, give me 10 minutes, and then see if you're still lost.
Okay,
Okay, because this is very what
it feels huge.
it is. It's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge, Dory.
I think I don't know which caliber it went under, but what I do know is the vote for the representatives in Israel, which I guess a lot of us are not really aware, but
Yeah.
it's brought every day and every week and every Saturday.
Right.
There was to sign up to.
To vote in the World Times Congress, yeah.
For $5.
Right.
That was really, really important.
Yeah.
Like, unbelievably.
That was work of a combination of the Israel Task Force that was formed after October 7th
Uh-huh.
and the social justice process of wanting to empower, and
That was
this will help
something.
clarify for Spencer, like, how do we do this? I haven't answered yet. This is just like, what are we thinking about, right? Those 5 values charge us to take some kind of position on these 13 issues. And we wanted to do is lay out what our understanding of the Jewish tradition tells us vis-a-vis these 13 areas, so that if and when a question of national or local or statewide concern gets raised around one of these issues, we know what we stand for. The board has expressed that, and the staff and the leadership have the green lights to go pursue that vision, whatever that looks like. Advocating for, advocating against, building partnerships, spending time. For example, this past Saturday, some of you were a part of this. We worked in partnership with the Florida Immigrant Coalition to help American law be fulfilled. What do I mean by that? One of the things that we heard from our partners at Flick is that there are a lot of people who are permanent legal residents, right? We know that as green card holders, permanent legal residents who are eligible to apply for citizenship, but haven't. Either because they didn't know that they could, or they didn't know how, or the process was too daunting. They didn't know. Anyone ever had analysis paralysis?
Yes.
Where you've got something to do and it seems just too big and you don't know where to start? But if you have someone to hold your hand and say, this is how you start, and this is how you fill out the form, and this is where it goes, and don't worry, I'm gonna guide you through this.
Or you're afraid you're gonna get arrested.
Or you're afraid you're gonna get whatever it might be, right? So like, that was a need that Flick has identified as, oh, there is a need for folks who are eligible for citizenship to help them get their process started. And they've been organizing fairs, right? Day-long events where volunteers are there to help meet the need of a potential future citizen. And they publicize to their community, come to this place on this day, and someone will help you get the process started. What they needed was hosts. They needed a facility. So they came to us and said, would Temple Bethel consider being a South Palm Beach County host of an event like this? And this past Shabbat morning, about 50 people, give or take, came to get their citizenship application started through the work that members of our congregation and others who chose to volunteer, who were trained by Flick. We had a couple of attorneys on site as well to get this process for these people, right? We know that Jewish phrase, if you save a life, you save the world. And we said, if we get one person more deeply ensconced in their country by helping them get their citizenship, we've done a good thing that day. And we did it, right? I'll walk you through how we got to be able to do it, but that's an example of where this could take us and has taken us. Spencer, I want to keep going if that's okay.
Yeah, you answered it.
All right. So I'm going to start with one actually that was sort of an obvious one as what is an area of social concern, right? A lot of people assume, oh, it's all these external things, because we've done a lot of work with racial equity and LGBT. I mean, there's a lot of things that we do that is not sort of directly in service of the needs of the Jewish community, but advocating against anti-Semitism is social justice work. We are out there trying to meet people's needs where they are, like Beth Israel Congregation in Jackson, Mississippi. And we are working to advance the national, local, and statewide dialogue to help this be less of a concern in the future. I can't think of a better example of social justice work than combating anti-Semitism, just because it serves our personal needs, all more than more so. Remember, Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh Bazeh. We are responsible for each other. This should be our first concern, both alphabetically and. So we took this position. Temple Bethel stands against all forms of anti-Semitism, including hostility to, prejudice towards, or discrimination against a Jewish individual or the Jewish people as a whole. Acts of anti-Semitism are a direct attack against our identity and our right to exist as Jews. We will work towards a future free from discrimination against the Jewish people. 3 sentences is all you need. We chose to identify which of those 5 core values really undergird this particular concern. Kol Yisrael Arvim Zeh Bazeh inspires us to confront anti-Semitism wherever it manifests. Justice shall you pursue inspires us to stand up and demand justice for Jews around the world. You must not remain indifferent inspires us not to turn a blind eye on any vulnerable Jewish community. By the way, there's a great example of where might be overlap. Yes, there is anti-Semitism in the larger community. We know that. We saw it rear its ugly head over the weekend. And there is a particular form of anti-Semitism that we see in certain spaces, right? For example, in the LGBTQ plus space, right? We've seen that in those spaces, there's a particular strain of anti-Semitism that has nothing to do with what went on in Mississippi, comes from somewhere else, but it's there. And so if we want to do the work around combating anti-Semitism, we also have to be in the LGBTQ plus space. We also have to be in a conversation around racial equity, because we know that there's some anti-Semitism that comes out of other racial minorities that there's work to be done with and alongside it with. It's a constellation. These are not individual lanes. As much as we try to tease them apart, they weave back together, which makes the work fun and challenging. And then we went the next step to identify specific teachings from our tradition that speak specifically to this concern. By the way, we did this for all 13 issue areas. We're going to cover 3 or 4 over the next day over the next 84 minutes, but we have them for all 13. It's a lot of work. And this promise is what has stood by our ancestors and us. For it was not only one man who rose up to destroy us. In every single generation, people rise up to destroy us. For those of you who are in the Beit Midrash, you will see this illuminated Haggadah. And there's this teaching from the Haggadah, Vehi she'amda, she who stood up. There will be those who will stand up against our people in every generation. As much as we might wish that the fire of anti-Semitism will be snuffed out, we would be foolish to think so. It's going to come and it's going to go. We need to be ready to combat it. Now listen, when I was 17 years old, we may have been foolish to think it was almost gone in the year 1999, right? But here we are. Here's what I take comfort in. We know how to do this. You know why? We've been doing it for thousands of years. Anti-Semitism is a historical and contemporary concern. We will work not only to combat historical prejudice against Jews, but to defend ourselves in our time against those who would seek to do us harm. There's good old-fashioned anti-Semitism, there's modern-day anti-Semitism, and we can talk about the ends of the political spectrum on both sides, how on both extremes there is anti-Semitism that has certain things in common. The Jews are the eternal enemy, and certain things that are unique. And that enemy is trying to hurt us in this way. They're either globalists or they're colonialists, to use a shorthand for it. But it's there. And people talk about how that political spectrum is becoming a horseshoe that's meeting in the middle. There's work to be done. There's work to be done.
It's becoming a horseshoe.
Mordecai had this message to be delivered to Esther. Do not imagine that you, of all the Jews, will escape your life by being in the king's palace. On the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows, perhaps you have attained to royal position for just such a crisis.
Mhm.
No Jew is safe from anti-Semitism. No court Jew, no president's son-in-law or chief of staff. It doesn't matter your role in the government, because those opportunities, those places are fleeting. In the story of the Jewish people, they will come and go. Now, if you're in a place of power and influence, like Esther was, you should see yourselves as having, I have an opportunity to try to combat anti-Semitism because I have a position of power. And it's a shame if those who have a position of power don't do that. You never know. We never know, except it's gonna be there, and we should, whenever we have a chance, which also means, and this is, I think, not the mistake of the American Jewish community, but the missed opportunity. When I think about how organizations like AJC invested all of their resources, or the majority of their resources, in the 90s and 2000s, and even 2010s in the beginning, focusing abroad, right? Where they needed it, right? They needed to focus in Europe. They needed to focus in Latin America. They needed to focus in the Middle East, which is where they put a lot of their efforts in. And if you had asked me in 2012, that was all really, really, really good work. And where we as a Jewish community took our eye off the ball was stateside, right? And then I will say to their credit, and I'm a supporter of AJC, I'm a board member. After the shooting in Pittsburgh, they were the one, right? Who remembers Stand Up for Shabbat? That first Shabbat afterwards. It was AJC who organized that.
Native congregation.
It was every congregation, Dory.
No, but we all.
It was so that was a local event put on by the Boca Interfaith Clergy Association at B'nai Torah.
Right.
That later that week.
Right.
But that Friday night, we had 650 members of this congregation here for Shabbat services, because when an organization like AJC, which is not really concerned with the religiosity of Jews, that's not their main focus. They said, Yidden, go to shul. Show the world what our response is when someone tries to snuff out our lights. Lean into our Yiddishkeit. Lean into our Jewishness.
That's also happens a lot with Hanukkah. Like people were showing up to Hanukkah
Right.
services
What I'm-
in record numbers.
Right, this is all Dory, in this sort of new but old world order of, it's a thing that we are doing because we are pushing back against the rise of anti-Semitism that we are seeing in the community. This is, I think, a response to Pittsburgh and Poway and October 7th. Like we're seeing and we're seeing it in this congregation, right? Our membership has grown as a direct result, in part, of this rise of anti-Semitism. It shouldn't have to be that way, but it's good that it's that way. And the same thing that I'm hearing from my friends in Mississippi, the community is rallying, and the Jewish community is rallying. We shouldn't have to, what we should know is, we should be just as fervent in our Judaism when things are good, but that isn't human, that's not, human way. But at least we're doing it now, and we should keep that momentum going.
I thought the record numbers of Hanukkah were because of the acting.
Also that too. Just as Queen Esther summoned her bravery and recognized her unique opportunity to defend and protect the people, we will use our unique talents and resources in our time to do the same. When there's what we can do, we should do it. And this is one that I was pleased that we included, because it speaks to something that I think is also really, really important. Jews cannot fight anti-Semitism alone. The victim cannot cure the crime. The hated cannot cure the hate. It would be the greatest mistake for Jews to believe that they can fight it alone. The only people who can successfully combat anti-Semitism are those active in the cultures that harbor it. The great Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory. People have asked me post-October 7th, when we saw certain segments of the population be more supportive of the attackers than the victims than we would have liked, asking me, should we step away from those relationships? And my response was, I understand why that feels tempting, but pardon my French, hell no. We need to deepen those relationships. We need to be help changing the narrative, because the reality is, the reason why that message is resonant in the community is because we don't have deep relationships. They see similarities, they see the world on the axis of oppressor and oppressed. They see the world in an axis of if you have power, you are inherently evil. And if you are disempowered, you are inherently good. Irrespective of how you use whatever power you have or don't have. And that's in part because we were in a vacuum of relationship with some of those communities. And so we have to double and triple our efforts to build those relationships again, not move away from them. If someone says something, if someone that you otherwise, have a relationship with says something you don't like, if you turn your back on them, now you have no voice. And we need their voices in this conversation. The kid who did the thing over the weekend did not come from any of those progressive spaces that we in Mississippi.
Oh, that's good.
He was 19.
That's
He was a
really good.
19-year-old college kid who was convinced of the evil of Judaism, right? It didn't come from Islam. It didn't come from Iran. It didn't come from Hamas. It didn't come from Hezbollah. He is a 19-year-old Christian American kid from Madison, Mississippi.
What was that incident?
The burning of the torching of the synagogue this weekend.
Oh,
Okay?
19?
He was 19. He was 19. We have to be aware of those things, right? It has always and will always come from anywhere. The best thing that we can do is be in relationship as widely and deeply as possible. Because we need the majority among whom we live to be our partners in keeping us safe. We can't do it alone, nor should we have to do it alone. If we try to do it alone, we will fail.
Amen.
Alan.
Yeah, I've been as a young adolescent growing up, I recall in the sixties. With all the depravity going on, I'm talking about within the US, I'm not talking about anti-Semitism. Worldwide like you talked about, but I think. In my own mind, that's where I started to see anti-Semitism in the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
In the US, and I recall the Jews and the black population, and then around that time worked very well together.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I fast forward, I don't really want to get into politics, but it's our federal government, in my opinion, in the let's say 2009 and going forward, when the federal government, to many of the Jewish people, probably felt the government itself maybe helping to spawn some anti-Semitism. So I'm thankful for what you're saying, that Temple Bethel was taking, and anti-Semitism today has been has a much different face than it did when I was born.
So I'm going to take you from what you just said and go from there, which is that what we do know is that anti-Semitism is it is at its core, it is a conspiracy theory. And that is a very helpful framework because conspiracy theories morph and change with each iteration. It allows for the person who is proffering it to frame it however they need to. The anti-Semitism of the 20s wasn't the same in the 30s, wasn't the same in the 40s, wasn't the same in the 60s, wasn't the same in the 80s, wasn't the same in the aughts, wasn't the same in the teens, isn't the same now in the 20s. There are some core things that are the same, but the power of it is that it can be morphed very nimbly, which is why it's impossible to snuff out. What we need to do is convince most people to say that it's not worth paying attention to because it's not actually real, it's a conspiracy theory. But we are living at a time, I believe, this is a personal commentary, that more people are more susceptible to conspiracy theories than in generations past. There were times before when it was just as bad. I think we got to a place where it was not as bad, and now because of TikTok, and I'll sound like a lot of because of the TikToks, it's a little bit easier now. But that's what we're facing. Who are we working with? This obviously is an alphabet soup of a lot of organizations, some Jewish, some not. But this is a short list. The list is anyone who wants to stand with us. We could be our partner with, but these are national organizations who have historically fought the fight of combating anti-Semitism when it arises in whatever generation it might be. Right? It's a short list, but it's the top of the list. This is what we did for every issue area. Okay? What are our values? What do we think about it? How does our tradition illustrate what that looks like? Who might we work with? And then where this process looks like in practice is using a lay leadership structure that was modeled after our Beth-El circles model, right? I'm sure a lot of you participate in Beth-El circles in different ways, right? Beth-El circles are groups of members of the congregation with a common interest. It is lay driven, staff supported, right? So that, the staff can do some of the publicity, make sure the resources are there, but it's the lay folks who run the pickleball circle and the Israeli film circle and the book circle and whatever else maybe. And what we learned, by the way, the one thing I didn't mention, or one thing I haven't mentioned so far, is that we studied other organizations, other synagogues, who we see as leaders in doing this kind of work to say, how does it work in your place? How do you frame it? How do you resource it? How do you budget for it? How do you think about it? And we got different answers in different places. We talked to congregations like Emmanuel in Dallas. We talked to congregations in California, talked to congregations in Atlanta, Georgia. We talked to congregations in Washington, D.C. And it has to be reflective of the nature of your community. Leo Beck Temple in Los Angeles has always been a national leader on advocacy. It always has been. It's part of their raison d'etre as a synagogue. And they use a very specific model, the community organizing model around their work, which is essentially at any given time, they are working on one thing, and everything the congregation does tries to advance that one thing. That's a very powerful model. It would not work for us. It would not work for us. What's that? We're too diverse.
We're too big.
We're too big. And they're big too, but we're too big. And it would force us to step away from our history.
Yeah, we should be, we should.
We need to be able to do multiple things. Now, listen, there's only so much that you can do at one time, right? We probably can only do one major thing at one time. We can't run 3 ballot initiatives at one time. But we can run a ballot initiative, which is a 9-month undertaking, while still doing the giving tree and working on LGBTQ rights as an example, at multiple levels of commitment. That's sort of the Beth-El way. So what we did was we looked to the people who were self-selecting, right? We have a social justice committee. It's open to everybody. People came and we said, who is interested of those 13 areas? Who is motivated to take either a participatory role or a leadership role? And the folks who said, I care so deeply about this that I want to lead on it, that's how they became the circle leader. This is in our first iteration. So we have 5 circles: LGBTQ rights, protecting democracy, anti-Semitism, immigration, reproductive freedom. Those were the 5 areas that members of our congregation said, we are so committed to this that we're committing to it. And I will say, we are enjoying success in all 5 of varying degrees. Some of it, to me, one of the biggest thing that speaks to how successful you can be is there what to do, right? We cannot, as a synagogue, by ourselves, be the only ones working on changing policy vis-a-vis gun violence prevention. We are not in a position to do that. We would be best suited if there was some other movement happening to be a joiner in. And to be an amplifier and a catalyst. In fact, that's true for all of these things. Because what are we first and foremost?
Synagogue.
We're a synagogue who has worship and life cycle and learning core to who we are. This is also core to who we are, but we have to know, it's very important to know, where can you be a national leader? Where can you be a national participant? We can be a national leader among synagogues who do this work. But It's not our place to be the organization to lead a ballot initiative. We are not resourced and equipped for that. Because our geographic reach is actually pretty limited. It's deep where we have it, but we're limited to Boca, Delray, Highland Beach, a little bit of Boynton. That's about it. When I think about our work on Amendment 4, which needed to get 60% of Floridians to vote for it, the work that we did, we got our community to 67%.
Pretty good.
In our area, we got it to 67%, which I attribute as a huge success. The state, only 57. So the effort failed. But we did a good job doing what we could do. We are not in a position to affect too many voters in St. Johns County. Other than to tell the other synagogues that we knew in that area, this is a strategy, to brainstorm and work with them. But like, we have to know what we can and can't do. Otherwise, we'll burn ourselves out. We'll burn ourselves out in disappointments if we try, there's that saying, teach me, give me a lever long enough and I can move the world. Yeah, well, levers can only be so long and you have to be in the community to do it. We have a stronger, more powerful lever where we are. And knowing that is a piece of this conversation. And if we feel like, oh, we don't have a lever in that space, before we start working, what should we do? Go build the lever. So if we need someone to be our partner in this work, before we ask something of them, what do we have to do?
Figure out what to ask.
Build relationship. Right. All right. We'll start here and we'll see where this takes us. Temple Bethel believes in dignity, honor, and humane treatment of all immigrants and refugees, regardless of their origin. As a people, we have wandered the desert in Canaan, were strangers in Egypt, and sought refuge after the Holocaust. We made our way back to Israel, the land of milk and honey, and to America, the land of opportunity. We are compelled to help others just as others helped us along our journey to redemption. That's a statement from our tradition. I mean, it's a statement informed by our tradition. It does not advocate for a particular policy or immigration position. It does advocate for something very, very, I think, greater than that should inform those decisions. What does it advocate for?
Respect for human dignity.
Respect for human dignity. In the work that we have done vis-a-vis immigration, when we held that event back in September in partnership with Flick and the Boca clergy, we didn't say these people should be admitted, these people should be asked to leave, this is the policy, this shouldn't be the policy. We're not really there yet. It's not really our expertise. What our expertise is if at any point anyone is engaging with our immigration laws or our immigration system or law enforcement officers who are enforcing, everybody should be treated with what? Dignity and respect. You can deport someone with dignity and respect. You can deport them without dignity and respect. You can confirm someone's ability to remain in this country with indignity and disrespect. That's what we should be advocating against. As not as policy wonks, but as a religious organization. And by the way, this message has been very, very powerful to bring our interfaith clergy partners together, because we all can stand up for that. Whether you're the white bread Episcopalians and the white bread Lutherans who may have a different perspective about immigration than historically immigrated people like Jews and Muslims, we can at least agree on that particular perspective and advocate for that. And do so, by the way, without ruffling too many feathers on the home front of the congregation. Because if someone in our community is bothered by the fact that I say that immigration enforcement action should be done with dignity and respect, and they say, no, certain people aren't deserving of that, I can say, I and our tradition disagree with you. Anyone can believe whatever they want. right? As a member of Bethel, you are not being put to a, you know, a litmus test on what you believe. But I do believe that as our rabbinic leaders and our lay leaders are able to say what our tradition stands for and what it doesn't. And as a member of our community, you're free to disagree with that. But you can't tell us we shouldn't do something that our tradition stands for. And that can get a little dicey. It really hasn't yet. It did a little bit with Amendment 4, but a limited of conversations. We're gonna stop there because we're at time, we're gonna pick up here next week. Is there one area that you want to learn about in this?
I was curious to know, is there somewhere we can access?
All of this is on our website. I
Oh, it
pulled
is?
this off of our website.
Oh, great.
All of this is on our website. Letter for letter, word for word.
To read
Yeah.
about each of these items.
Yeah.
I don't think about gun violence as Jewish roots.
Okay,
Because guns are fairly new in terms of how long. ago.
Sure. sure, weapons are not, but guns are, yeah. Right, it's, by the way, it's not about the weapon, it's about the violence protection,
Yeah.
Okay,
right? It's and that's what it is, it's about protecting the safety of life. And things that make us less safe are all over through our tradition.
by the way, you shrunk it enough where it became